Welcome to Finding the Frame. I'm your host, Chris Haigh, and I'm joined today by Creative Director of Filmmakers Academy, Stephen Napolitano, and a BAFTA-winning editor whose episodic work on Snowpiercer and Wednesday, as well as his features work on Scream 6 and also Beetlejuice, have shown him to be one of the finest editors working today. It's an honor to welcome editor Jay Prychidny to Finding the
Ah,
Frame. Jay, thanks so much for giving us your time.
oh, thank you so much. I'm so happy to talk to you guys about the movie.
Oh, honestly, we've been excited about this. Steve and I, when we went and saw the
Yes.
movie, we were like, oh, to get this guy on the pod is just going to be so exciting. So,
Oh,
yeah, thank
cool.
you so much for coming.
Yeah, no problem.
So, I suppose we'll get back into Beetlejuice in a moment. But first of all, you're the first editor we've had on the pod. And,
Ah,
we usually get DPs, we usually get directors, we usually get, we've got some production designers on, some costume designers, things like that. But you're our first editor on the pod. And I think one of the things that the people at Filmmakers Academy really want to kind of know is, and I too, I'm intrigued as to how you started your journey, how you became an editor. Obviously, there's going to be assistant edit positions and stuff like that. But what was it that really kind of got you started as an editor and got you into this field?
yeah, it's interesting. I mean, people kind of say to me, like, it was, people, adults who were in my life as a kid, they were like, oh, it's so obvious you're going to be an editor, which is like a weird thing to say. Because it's like, I'm like, what? How could you say that? But I mean, from a very young age, I was just fascinated by movies. I loved movies. I mean, the original Beetlejuice was like my favorite movie when it came out. I saw it when I was 7 years old. And, it just like, it blew my mind, just the imagination of it, the creativity of it. It was like nothing I'd seen before. And it just kind of really fired my imagination. And it's such an intriguing topic that kids think about, which is death, and like what happens when you die, and it's kind of just like a fun kid accessible way to like explore that kind of like heavy theme. And I guess I was a little morbid, so I was interested in exploring kind
Yeah.
of more morbid topics. So I was just always fascinated with films. I loved watching films. And so, probably about when I was about 8 or 9, I was probably like just hooking up. So I guess this is why it's obvious why I was going to become an editor, because I just was like hooking up VCRs together and like splicing movies. Okay, it
I
sounds
love
obvious when I say it like this.
that.
I was just like splicing, clips from movies onto another VHS tape and making kind of my own pseudo trailers.
That's
And
cool as
then,
hell.
That's amazing.
and then just, as I was, got older, 10, 12, I was just writing my own scripts and getting my friends together and acting and making movies. So I did think I was going to be a director, really, because that's what I was doing. I was writing and directing. But around like, and so I went to university for film, and it was kind of in university where I kind of realized that editing was just the more fun place to be. It was just naturally where I gravitated to. It's just, I wanted to be editing more than I wanted to be directing, which was a strange thing because that's what I had been doing my whole childhood. So I just then kind of focused on that. And yeah, I think looking back, it does make sense, because even though I was writing and directing all my own little videos and stuff, it's like, what I was really fascinated with was the construction of movies. Like I just wanted to understand, like, how do these things get created? That's why I was like looking at these films and analyzing them and making my own little trailers and stuff. I was just like really looking at the shots and how they're put together. And I was just fascinated by the construction of it, which was just editing.
Yeah. I think that one of the coolest things about the stuff that you've edited, or the stuff that I've seen that you've edited, like when I was watching Scream 6, and then when I've watched this Beetlejuice, it's just the way that you can impact on people's emotions, and the way that you can get people to react. I think that comes through straight away. The editing really does have an impact on an audience. Like the audience I was watching Beetlejuice 2 with, everybody was howling laughing at certain
Oh
points.
man.
There were certain just cutaways and beats. There's one bit, I'm not going to give it away for everybody, but there's a bit about Bob at the end, and this title card pops up just about the death of Bob, I suppose I'll call it, and everybody just howled laughing, and it didn't matter what age. And I was like,
Oh,
yeah,
that's
that's
so
really good
funny.
editing, you know?
Oh,
Yeah,
that's funny. That was something that I just put on because, yeah, because they wanted to do this little roll call of the cast at the end, which I was like, okay. Um, I don't know. It was just like, I don't know. I just felt like it needed to be more than that. Like there needed to be some added content or some little added joke or bit or something. So
yeah.
we did so many different versions of that, like end little credit thing. But like in my first version, I did have that title card you're talking about Bob, and that just always stayed. So that was just always the thing that was just a little extra joke at the end of the movie. So yeah, so I got to, I that was my idea. I wrote the dates, I wrote the year. I spent a lot of time thinking about what year was Bob born. I don't know. It seemed like like certain a lot of numbers seemed wrong, so I was spending a lot of time thinking what's the right year. I am actually, just as a little side note, I am actually the voice of Bob in the movie.
What? Is
Yeah.
this an exclusive that we just got right here? Is that?
This is, yes, I think this is the first time I'm
Oh,
coming
No
out.
wow.
way.
That's
Yeah, because
amazing.
How did that work then? So you went in and did the ADR in the booth or something? Like, what?
so we were like just spending a lot of time trying to get the sound of Bob and all the shrinkers, and it was a lot of back and forth because like the sound designers would like try something, and then Tim would look at it and respond, and he was never really happy with it. And he'd kind of give feedback, but the way Tim gives feedback is not always super clear. So he'd kind of just go, "No, it shouldn't be like this. It should be like this." Yeah, and people are like, "Oh, okay." And so they just kind of kept going back and trying things and trying things, and at one point the sound designer just got like fed up, and he was like, you know, Tim, you understand, Tim, you know what he's talking about, you just do it. So I just went in the booth and I just recorded all of Bob's yeah, we just went through the movie and I just recorded all of his bits, and then Tim never gave another comment on it. So that's
Wow.
yeah, so it just, yeah.
That's residuals for the next 20, 30 years of your life right there, isn't it? That's going to
Oh
happen.
well, no.
Oh, no? You don't get your SAG card for that? Does that not
No,
Yeah.
happen?
Unless he becomes a
What?
bigger character in the third movie or something,
I
which I'm
know,
hoping
right?
for. I really love Bob. I think he's a great addition.
Yeah, I mean, he is. He's kind of like the runaway star, I think, with the movie. I mean, people really, really relate to him in the preview screenings. People talk about their favorite character, and the
Yeah.
studio just didn't have the foresight to put Bob on there as an individual character, but they did have the shrinkers just as a group, the head
Mhm.
shrinker employees, and they were like the third highest rated character. And I think that's because of Bob, because Bob wasn't an option, so I think people just put the shrinkers and they turned out to be the number three most popular character in the movie.
It's true though. My friend went to one of those test screenings about 3 months ago, and he goes, "Oh," and he was going, "Yeah, Michael Keaton, great, yeah, blah blah." I went through, and then he went, "Bob," and I was like, I was trying to think, who's he talking about? Is it De Niro in there? What's going on
Yeah.
here? And then he was like, "No, Bob." I was like, "Oh wow, that's amazing."
And it is fascinating because it's like, Tim's instinct with that kind of stuff is to not. And that was the stuff he was reacting to when he wasn't liking the direction, is if it gets too
Mm.
cartoony, too goofy. I mean, that goes for the sound of him, but also the puppeteering. Like the puppeteering is like very, very subtle. Like some scenes he's hardly even moving, And, a puppeteer's instinct is to come in and be like, like really move
Yeah,
around a lot.
yeah, one of
But
the
like,
Muppets. Yeah,
yeah, exactly. But Tim was always like, no, pull it back, like more subtle, more abstract, so you can read more emotion into it. And so it is amazing if you're really watching like some of those Bob scenes. He's hardly even moving. Maybe his eye moves like just like a millimeter or something.
yeah.
Very, very small moves, but it has an impact.
I think that had a lot of stuff to do in the film as well. Like you've got Jenna Ortega, who seems to have a lot of humor in the eyes. You know, even in Wednesday, there's like a movement of the eyes and things. A lot of the
Yeah.
shots are very
Oh
much
yeah.
kind of like up here. You know what I mean?
Oh
So
yeah.
when you're trying to capture that as humor, is that something that you're focused on? You're looking at what her eye movements are going to be, or anything that's kind of a cutaway.
Oh, for sure. I mean, like so much of um editing. I mean, for me, like, and why editing I think is the coolest part of the whole process is it's so like connected in with human emotion. And so I
Yeah,
think to be a successful editor, like you really need to be kind of emotionally aware and emotionally open and just like, allow yourself to feel what emotions the footage is generating. I mean, that's both in how it's shot, but in actor performances too,
yeah,
and just, that was the amazing thing with Wednesday and Jenna. That was the most mind blowing thing about editing Jenna in Wednesday was because so much of the footage is just her like staring, she's just
yeah.
staring ahead or she looks to the side or, like hardly does anything at all sometimes. But, like I'd go through the footage and you could tell like there'd be emotional variations. And I don't know where it was coming from because technically she's just standing there looking straight ahead. But you could tell
Yeah.
like one take she was like, a little angry. One take she was a little, embarrassed. And it was just all these different emotional levels. And I didn't even understand where it was coming from or how she was transmitting that.
Wow.
But that was like the fun thing. I mean, that's a great thing as an editor to be able to like sense those emotions and then be able to construct it, in a
Yeah.
way that then leads the audience on an emotional the emotional journey you want them to go on, because that's ultimately what it's about. You want to be able to emotionally connect with the audience so they're invested in the story and the characters.
Felt that kind of emotional arc with her, especially towards like the end of the season. Like even if it's super nuanced, but like you
Yeah.
felt her opening up a little bit, each episode or throughout it. And then
Yeah.
I think that's what's really intriguing for the second, just to see like how much she's gonna open, even though it's like this much, but you could still see the like,
Yeah.
her emotions kind of trying to come out of this like, you know, this dead kind of girl,
Yeah.
deadpan.
Absolutely.
So when you were approaching Beetlejuice, was it something that you read the script and it was like, okay, I know how to take this through emotionally from one step to the other, or was it something that kind of like found its way as you were working on it?
Yeah, I mean, generally, when I first kind of read a script, there are certain. I kind of read it. I don't know. I'm not super great at reading scripts. I find them really hard to read. I'm kind of like, I guess I'm primarily kind of searching. Well, what is the emotional thing that like interests me when I read this? Like, what
Mm,
is capturing my attention? And I remember one of the big things in Beetlejuice that captured was the thread with Jeremy, both the scenes when Astrid realizes he's a ghost
mm.
and that she can see ghosts. Oh, are we doing spoilers or?
Oh, it does. Yeah, let's hope that by the time this goes out, everybody in the world's seen this film. Let's go for
Yeah.
that.
We'll put a note before, be like, this is a spoiler discussion.
um, but yeah, so that was a big emotional moment to me, a big reveal. I mean, just reading the script, just that
Yeah,
feeling of her coming to that realization was like a big moment for me. So like it was an emotion that I related to and understood in whatever way. And then the other scene with them where she realizes that she's been duped and she gets flashed with the camera in the immigration department and her soul gets stolen. Again, there was just like I was just like, this is, I don't know, and it's hard to describe like what that
yeah,
emotion is, but I just had a sense of what that all felt like, you know?
gotcha.
And so that's like when I go to edit it, that's something, because those scenes were I mean, this is an example, but because those scenes are meaningful to me, those I'm trying to tease out from the footage that same kind of emotion so that when an audience views it, they're hopefully feeling the same thing that I felt when I read the script. I'm trying to kind of transmit
Yeah.
that same kind of emotional storytelling. So I mean, because who knows what it feels like to have your to have a camera flash in your eyes and to have your soul switch with a boy in an afterlife
Yeah.
immigration department. But I just had a interpretation of what that did feel like, and so that's what I try to bring to the scene.
There's a real difference between the real world and the afterlife in terms of the way that I don't know. There's a real different kind of connection with the audience in terms of your editing. Is that something that you were aiming for? You were aiming for sort of like this much more sort of natural editing above ground, I suppose you'd call it. And then in the afterlife, we went into, I don't know, it felt a bit like we're in Beetlejuice's head at certain
Oh, for
points, just with this manic kind of energy.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I mean, yeah, both with Wednesday and with Beetlejuice, it was very much I took my editing cues from that character name. Like you're
Hmm.
saying, not in the living world stuff of
Yeah.
Beetlejuice, but definitely in the afterlife. I edited it with what I interpret to be Beetlejuice's sensibilities,
Yeah.
and I edited Wednesday with what I believe to be Wednesday's sensibilities, as though she were editing the show herself, you know.
Oh wow.
Um, so yeah, with Beetlejuice, that meant like a lot of manic energy, a lot of crazy, like abrupt, like so one style technique that came out were these kind of very abrupt scene transitions, often with like
Hmm.
music or with sound. Like it's like, there's like, it's not, you're not seamlessly moving into the next scene. It's like there's an abrupt, like the music is like blasting you in the ear and it's like, it could
Yeah.
be like a really tender moment, with like two characters hugging, and then the music just like blasts in this aggressive way. Or like when Dolores, when Danny DeVito the janitor is waxing, and then he hits the puddle and suddenly there are these abrupt kind of sound design changes, and that wasn't something I like really thought about ahead of time, like I'm going to do that. But I guess just as I was editing, for whatever reason, that felt like the editing
Yeah.
language of this movie, and it is part of that kind of Beetlejuicean kind of
Yeah.
like vibe, just that kind of we're here and there, we're here, because he can snap his fingers and turn into something else instantly. So it's that kind of embracing that kind of manic, quick change energy. And then yeah, the above world stuff. I mean, I it wasn't something I thought about when I read the script, but when I saw the footage, and how the actors were performing it and everything, the stuff that really kind of spoke to me was this kind of lower energy. I mean, all the characters are dealing with grief and trauma, not very
Yeah.
uplifting topics, but a lot of the characters do have this kind of morose energy, and so I became very fascinated by that. Just like the moments where the actors have these kind of subtle, kind of quiet, introspective moments, and it's like a big studio movie, mainstream movie. So I was
Yeah.
a little insecure about that. Like, ooh, like some of these scenes are like really slow and stuff, like I don't know if that's really the right thing. But, I mean, no one ever really bumped. I mean, we had some pacing concerns with the movie, but in general, yeah, I just kind of let those scenes take their time, get in the heads of the characters, have a slower, and like focusing on the physicality of things more in a really subtle way, like just a character touching a book, or just kind
Yeah.
of really focusing more on the physical. For whatever reason, that's what sparked to me when I watched the footage, just as an interesting land of the living
Yeah.
tone to bring to it. So that was kind of, yeah, kind of guiding principle for me there.
Was that daunting to you? Like, obviously, like it's probably one of the most anticipated movies of the last 20 years, really, for some people. And I know people like who've still got Beetlejuice posters on the walls and stuff. Like you said, it was one of your favorite movies when you were younger. Was
Yeah.
that daunting to take on this as a challenge? I bet.
For everyone, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Whether they had worked on the original movie or not,
Yeah.
everyone was feeling the pressure, that's for sure. I mean, and the pressure of just living up to the audience, I mean, that's really all
Yeah.
it's about, is like just, I mean, the nightmare would be if prevailing attitude was just like, well, why did you do that? Like, you've just ruined a classic movie. You've ruined my childhood. That's
Yeah.
the word. So, it was something everyone struggled with. I know, Tim definitely struggled with it. It's like, and part of the reason for that is it's not a movie that it's obvious how to sequelize it.
Yeah,
I mean, it's not like a Batman movie where roughly what a Batman sequel would be like.
yeah,
This is not like that. So that was something I definitely worried about. Is like, I mean, nothing I could do anything about because I wasn't
oh,
writing it, but definitely something I worried about is like, is this even the right story to be telling? Is this like, are these even the characters that we're
yeah,
supposed to be following? Like, I mean, there are so many creative questions about how do you do a sequel to that movie? And I mean, there's nothing you can do. It's like, this is what we're doing, but I did definitely question it. Like, is this the right story at all?
yeah.
Yeah.
Was it, I suppose, different to Scream 6, where obviously that's a massive
Yeah.
franchise and everything like that, and it's got a lot of canon? It's probably the same kind of daunting task, I suppose,
Oh,
to take that. I mean, great job, by the way, it was amazing.
oh,
But, in the same way, I bet that it was a bit nerve-wracking to take that on too, right?
oh, for sure. Yeah, in a different way, because in that more, it's like you kind of know what the fans are expecting more.
Mm,
It's like, and I was a huge fan of Scream as well. I saw all the
yeah,
movies, and I think it was the first R-rated movie I snuck into, the original Scream. Um, so but so it is a different challenge in that, and it's a six movie. There's a certain structure and expectation, and you're kind of playing within that.
yeah,
I mean, that's part of the whole shtick of that movie. But I mean, definitely still daunting its own way, because those fans are engaged. Like,
oh
the
yeah,
horror fans and the Scream fans. Even more so, maybe, like, they are really, really engaged, and they are looking at what you're doing in a very specific way,
yeah.
very focused way. So that is definitely, because if they're not happy, oh god, do you hear about it? Oh.
Yeah, no,
So
I know when Scream 4 came out, there was a lot of, it was a big anticipation
Uproar.
for that movie, and then Wes Craven, but
yeah,
whether it was, whether you liked it or not, definitely was like a big, this is after
yeah,
the first three, it's like, let's see what they're gonna do. And then for a lot of people, it was a disappointment, but I
I
still
really like
enjoyed it.
Scream 4, but
One of one of the things that I'd read in a previous interview that you did when I was researching was you were talking about how, was it Matt and Tyler? Yeah, who directed Scream 6? They gave you an awful lot of footage to play with, lots of different coverage, lots of different things like that. Whereas when you, not that we're comparing the two, but when you were working with Tim Burton, it felt like you said that he gave you an awful lot less coverage. It was a lot more focused on those kind of things. How did that change your editorial approach? Was that things something that you had to kind of like work within? Were you giving him ideas for things that need to be reshot to help or anything like that? How did it change?
yeah, I mean, it's definitely, yeah, very different processes. I mean, every director is different.
Yeah,
And directors don't work with other directors, obviously. So directors don't know how even other directors do it a lot of the time. Like,
mm,
they just know the way they've done it.
yeah,
So everyone has their own very distinctive way of doing things. Matt
yeah,
and Tyler. I talked to them a little bit during the shooting, especially with some of the bigger sequences, like the big third act reveal, which all happen is a massive scene all in this one location. I definitely coordinated with them more, but in general, they're not very engaged with post production during shooting. They, for the most part,
gotcha.
they leave it to the end. But the way they shoot allows that, because they shoot so much, so many different options and angles, and because their shooting methodology is, if we might need it, let's get it. They
Yeah,
they don't want to sort it out when they're shooting. They're just like, let's get it, let's get everything.
yeah,
um and different versions, different styles, it's like, different. So that really affords a tremendous amount of freedom in editing, because you can almost, a lot of the time, almost make it whatever you want, you know?
Yeah.
um
Yeah.
and so that, because editing is so powerful, like you can change, if you have the footage, if you have the options, you can really change a scene completely. You know, you can make a scene be the opposite of what was shot, you know? I mean,
Yeah.
the more options you have, the more you can play. So whereas Tim is like the exact opposite, in that he's very involved in editorial, like every day of the shoot. um so you know, if he had time, he would come to editing like 2 or 3 times a day if he was able to.
Wow. Yeah.
Because and he also just moves so fast. Like he'll pop here, pop there. He doesn't have long meetings. He's constantly going all over the place. So, you know, if there was a break in filming, so I'm always, you know, in the studio editing wherever
Yeah.
he is shooting. So if there's a break in editing, break in shooting, they're doing a lighting setup, whatever, he just leaves the set. He doesn't hang around. He goes and does something else. And so one of those things could be pop by editing. I can show him footage, dailies if he's interested, what he wants to see. I can show him all the stuff I've been cutting. And we can talk about the scenes and talk about, yeah, like what could be missing. I can flag to him, here's the scene I've cut, you could get this additional footage, and he can yay or nay that. um, and then we're also just giving him outputs every day. Like he has an iPad where he has all the dailies and all the cuts of everything on his iPad, so, and he just has that with him all the time for reference.
Blimey.
So
Wow.
so at the end of every day, we're outputting all the scenes that he's shot as footage and as my cut scenes. So he's always up to date. So we have to keep that updated, so that if he shot something yesterday or the day before, it needs to be on his iPad as a cut,
Blimey.
you know?
So
So,
so how do you go at that breakneck pace then? How does that affect you as an
Yeah.
editor? You're going through literally the dailies at what,
yeah.
10 till 5 every day. You're trying to get everything done ready for the next day, effectively.
Yeah. I mean, it's like an editing marathon, really. It absolutely
Yeah.
is. I mean, I was always a fast editor,
Yeah.
but I mean, you know, this scenario has definitely like
Yeah.
made me even faster, because you're like just constantly, you know, and so it becomes this like, it becomes like a relay race between like me and my assistant, because I'll get the footage, say, you know, there may be like 3 scenes in a day, you know, it depends on the day,
Yeah.
obviously, but say there's like 3 scenes that they shot in a day. So it's like, you know, I'll take a couple hours, I'll edit the first scene, and then I'll give it to my assistant to start working on sound while I start cutting the second scene. You know, a couple hours, I have my second scene done. I hand it back to the assistant. He switches. After he's done sound work, I could give him feedback on, you know, because the sound is also really, really important. So I may
Of
have
course.
feedback or notes for him on the sound, or it's really good, you know. And so then
Wow.
I'll take his sound edit, I'll do my own mix pass, get the music, and then, you know, you switch, you get onto the third scene.
What
Yeah.
music are you using in that? Are you putting temp music in there? Like obviously you've got Danny Elfman's score as well coming through, so it's kind of a rich tapestry of music, I suppose. What are you putting in as temp music when you're editing these dailies together?
Yeah, it's kind of whatever. I mean, generally, well, it was interesting because on Wednesday, Tim didn't want to use Danny Elfman music at all. In the
Okay,
Danny Elfman, we knew he was a composer, but he didn't want Danny Elfman to have any temp music in there. And I think
gotcha.
part of the reason why was he just wanted to explore a new thing. You know, he just
Yeah,
wanted to explore different style. He didn't want to like just you know, just rely on things all having the same tone. He wanted to just kind of
Yeah.
open
gotcha.
up. It was interesting actually, very early on he played for me, like one of the first meetings I had with him, like on set in Romania for Wednesday. I came in and he played for me John Carpenter's theme for Halloween 3. And he was like, this is the sound. This is the sound. And I'm like, it was interesting because, before I start a project, I do a curation of music that I think is right for that kind of project, the tone of that project. And that's the music I pull from when I'm, and I it's just so funny because I remember specifically thinking like, well, John Carpenter isn't actually the right tone for this show, so I didn't actually bring any John Carpenter music. So it's really odd that he comes, this is what I want. He's like obsessed with this like Halloween 3 theme. And I was like, oh, okay. So, and I had my own interpretation of what he was saying. Like, oh, so he's looking for something that is a kind of a blend between orchestra and electronic and just like a new, different kind of sound. So I then started pulling music like that and using that kind of stuff. And then he was like, no, just John Carpenter, Halloween 3. I'm like, what? Like he wanted just literally the Halloween 3 music to open the show. And for a long time, it was that way. So, he really wanted to actually use that music to start the entire show. But in the end, we ended up replacing it.
Is that the same with what happened with MacArthur? Obviously, we're using spoilers in this, so it doesn't matter. But the MacArthur Park at the end, I knew MacArthur Park because I recorded it once with an orchestra, so I loved that tune. But once it came in, it was one of these where I was like, "What? What? How? Why?" Like it just blew me away. I mean, it's amazing. It's probably one of my favorite endings to any film. But like, how did that come about? I'm still amazed by it.
Yeah, it's probably one of those things where like 90% of the audience is like, what is happening? And then just that 10% which you're in is like, whoa!
I was the 90%. I'm like, what is it?
Yeah, because even if you know the song MacArthur Park, you often don't know that version, which is the original version. So a lot of people, even if they know MacArthur Park, they're just like completely bewildered by the entire thing.
It's the Maynard Ferguson trumpet version. That's the one that everybody seems to know for some reason.
The which?
I don't know. Maynard Ferguson, the trumpet version. Yeah.
Oh, I thought it was.
And it's like he does it with a big band. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, it's really cool actually. The Maynard Ferguson version. If you've not heard it, it's great. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that whole thing was very, very wild because in the script it was not like that. In the script, the whole wedding sequence was a scene, just like a dialogue action scene. I don't even remember, but I mean this movie from page to screen definitely went through a lot of kind of
an evolution.
Yeah. And that was something we did get page revisions on, just like one day it's like we just got, like the whole wedding scene was gone and it was just like literally just the lyrics of MacArthur Park written out. I'm like, I don't know how, 5 pages. It's just like the lyrics, and you're just like what?
Someone left a cake out in the rain.
It was totally. But I think what happened, I think the writers did tell me later that's what Tim said to do. They were just like, just put in the lyric, put in all the lyrics. And the writers are like, what? That's what happened. It was just it was page after page of like lyrics, and it's like, okay, like I don't exactly know what this is or what this means.
So how do you approach that as an editor then? Because it's quite a formidable. It's 7.5 minutes long, and it didn't feel like there was a minute cut or anything from that. It felt like it was the entire piece of music with all the key changes and chord changes and speed changes, like the speed ramping throughout that piece, like with bridges and all kinds of stuff in there. So.
Well, yeah. So, I mean, the whole song is not in there for sure. But Tim's whole concept of it also was, and he kept saying it's a mashup. It's a mashup of MacArthur Park, and what he meant was because he didn't have a complete exact idea about how the sequence would go in the cut. Yeah. He just had like the 7.5 minute long version of the song, and he was like filming bits for each part of the song, so like, he'd film, like a minute of the first part of the song and whatever is happening in that minute for the first part of the song. And then, and kind of like that. So it was kind of in segments. We had footage for like probably the whole song, but it wasn't to be presented that way. Like he shot it to the actual order of the song, but he never was like, this is ever how it's going to be. So his idea was it's a mashup. It's a mashup. So it's like, it's like whichever part that he filmed, it can go anywhere. Well, this is what he was telling me. He was like, so, it's like you can just cut from whatever part to whatever part that you want to. Don't worry about the song. Don't worry about the song. Just cut to whichever part of the scene you want to go to. And it's like,
seems pretty vague.
but I mean, just the, because MacArthur Park is not a normal song. It's like a crazy song. It's not, it defies kind of regular music editing. You can't just go to any part of the song that you want to, because it changes in key and tone and pace, tempo, everything. Like no part of the song sounds like the other part of the song. So, so that was like, so his idea was kind of like, just mash it up. Just like, we'll figure it out, and it's like, well, I mean, someone has like, who's figuring it out? Like, it's like me,
That's nuts. That's absolutely nuts.
So, I did work with, a music consultant that he's worked with on a few projects, Michael Haigh, and we kind of collaborated to kind of figure out how we can make these edits and transitions, because you can't just cut to anything you want. Like you have to find some way to make the music flow. So it's a lot of like finding these transitions to be able to go in and out of these different periods of sections of the song. And then we did end up reorchestrating the whole thing. So all of the music you hear in the movie is a new orchestration of it, and we used AI to separate the vocals from the original track and then just re-edit the original vocals into the reorchestration. And then you could edit, so you could edit the vocal so it matched the lips more closely. So in the end, it looks like this completely, like you said, it just looks like the song, but it's not the song. If you go back and listen to the original, it doesn't have the same structure of that at all, So it was kind of like tearing our hair out to kind of like pull this entire song apart and then put it together in a way that it just looks like, well, that's the song.
Is it something that you love doing as an editor, working with music? Because you can see, I mean, I knew from, I think it was really early on, there's the bit with Monica Bellucci when she's stapling herself together and there's tragedy. I felt like I was watching sort of the Thriller music video or something like that. It felt like it was a really cool way to introduce a sort of bad guy. You know what I mean? Is that something that you really enjoy as an editor, working within that medium?
That's interesting you say Thriller, because that was like my favorite music video as a kid. And definitely when I edited that Wednesday dance in the viral Wednesday dance, like Thriller for me editing wise was like a definite inspiration there. I was like, I want to make this like Thriller, which is why I kind of started on just this close up of her face and you don't see her moving at the beginning. But anyway,
that's cool.
That's amazing.
I was just wondering if that's something you enjoy working with. I mean,
Yeah, it's definitely like on my bucket list for sure to like edit a musical. I would love to do that because, I've also, I spent years kind of editing a dance show in Canada. It was like it was a small kids dance show that I worked on for 4 or 5 years. And it was a big hit, kind of throughout the world. But I mean, I edited so many dance sequences that I just really, I've edited, I don't know, dozens and dozens of just like dance segments. So, and I just love it. I think it's so powerful, which was why it was so cool that I got to do that like Wednesday dance. Because I was like, oh, I know how to do this. I've done like...
Is that one of the first things you worked on when you worked on Wednesday?
No, that was like one of the last things actually. Yeah, because that was like episode 4, which was one of the last episodes filmed. So But yeah, I mean, music. I mean, you can see, like, I think in Beetlejuice, I mean, it has like a musical kind of sensibility, and
Yeah.
like the songs are treated almost like musical dances in a way. Like, it's not just kind of background songs, or, it's like, it's really forward. Oh, I mean, it does have a dance scene. It has like the whole Soul Train
Yeah.
scene, which is like a dance scene.
It's
So,
one of the
but,
coolest scenes.
sorry?
I love that scene.
Yeah.
Well, there's twice it comes, but yeah, I love Soul Train.
Yeah.
It's really cool. Yeah.
So, I mean, definitely, that was what I wanted to do. Just like be like very music forward, very driving, just music, everything else kind of drowned out. It's like really just very music focused show. And for whatever reason, that just kind of happened in a lot of scenes. I mean, the bike ride is another example like that, where it's just this kind of music blasting, even when it switches into this car crash segment, towards the end. It's like, it just, the music still keeps going, and the music is just still very forward. So I don't know, that was just something that I just wanted to kind of explore, kind of presenting the scenes that way.
Something that you said earlier about the different styles that seem to come. Like, how did you navigate those? Because you went from, like, there's claymation in there at one point. I think I won't call it a noir cop show, but the whole Willem Dafoe scenes
No,
are
yeah.
very kind of. Would you say
Well,
that? Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I think Tim. What was his reference for that? It was like a '60s cop show. He wanted it to really be. I forget. Oh, I forget the name of the show, but
Yeah.
I mean, so much of the film is like references that are important to Tim. I mean, there are things that just like are meaningful to him in his life. Whether it's tragedy or MacArthur Park or the '60s TV show. It's all things that are were kind of impactful to him or some way. In one scene like that, the dad is like watching Wheel of Fortune, and Tim was just very specific. It has to be Wheel of Fortune. So it's like there's all these kind of little Easter eggs that are kind of Tim's. I mean, Astor goes to Dracula's castle, which is in Romania. That's connected to the whole Wednesday thing. And Dracula's castle is also a place Tim's been a number of places. And, knowing that was his, like, so the Carrie music at the end was actually my idea, because I kind of like, because I knew that Carrie was one of his favorite movies. And when I saw how he was shooting it, I kind of inferred that he might have Carrie in mind, like when he's shooting that. So I just kind of went whole hog, and I was just like, oh, okay, put the Carrie music in. And he just loved that. And he loved it so much that, he just never wanted to try doing a score there. He just loved using that music. And I think he talked to Brian De Palma just to say that he, wanted to do this. And yeah, so.
There was also another part in the movie where I think it's Beetlejuice is doing a lot of exposition, and I read that was originally done in English, and it didn't seem to work. And then it goes into some kind of black and white sort of Italian soap opera style. Like, how did that come about from being really meant to be?
Well, again, it was like, that was just like a brainwave of Tim's, I mean, both of these subtitle segments, because there's that where Beetlejuice is speaking Italian, and then that begets the idea later on when he's the Matador and he's speaking subtitled Spanish.
Yeah.
Because both of those scenes were just intended to be English. But, I mean, like I say, Tim just also just loves old Italian subtitled movies, like just that whole style with the voiceover. And that was all a later idea. I guess it kind of came in stages, because it was obviously scripted to be a flashback, but it wasn't scripted to be in the style of a black and white Italian movie. So that just the visual of it being black and white, and they shot it with like an infrared camera to give it kind of a weird old feeling to it. I don't know why infrared translates to old, but I don't know. It did for whatever reason.
Yeah.
So it was just that. It was just that visual style. And when I saw that, my idea was that it would just sound really crummy as well. So like I found a lot of temp music that was like really old. I forget what we used, but Bride of Frankenstein. I remember I used a lot of kind of Bride of Frankenstein
Oh, that's
music
cool.
in my temps. So we like really degraded the quality just to make it sound really tinny, and so that's what it was. And then it was a very late brainwave where Tim just said, no, this should just be like we just go all the way. We make it subtitled now. We make it Italian and subtitled, and he really wanted it to be this really flowery, overwritten kind of, like a lot of those old Italian voiceovers are, so that was just, so again, it's just, it's something that is personally meaningful to him in his life, and he just wanted to kind of explore all these different styles and tones in the movie.
Yeah, I think it really helped it flow. It's one of those where I'm trying to imagine it with English voiceover, and I can't obviously, but it's one of those where I think it probably would have slowed it down a bit. Whereas having that Italian sort of thing, I mean, like I said, the theatre that I was in, they were rolling over laughing at that point. You know what I mean?
Really?
It was really,
Well,
really,
that's cool.
yeah. That got an awful lot of laughs that bit, and it helped it to flow more.
It's funny because it was actually like originally a very much shorter voiceover, because it's a very simple story. There's not much to it. The reason why it's so long now is because it is so flowery, because you're not just talking about the story, you're talking about the Black Plague and the smell of death and all these things. It's like, so the story itself, it used to be in English, it used to be just much shorter, but it was lacking a certain, I mean, this was something that happened a lot in the movie, was, like Beetlejuice had written a lot of dialogue where he's explaining, expositional dialogue where he's explaining things. And a lot of the time they didn't even shoot it, as written, because it just didn't feel like the character. Like Beetlejuice shouldn't just be there explaining things and giving exposition. It just doesn't, it's not who he is. So they didn't even film most of that. They just kind of cut it out of the script on the day.
Gotcha.
But with this voiceover, they did film Michael doing the story, but I think it kind of just falls into that same zone where it's like, it just doesn't quite feel like the character exactly. So just kind of making it this Italian thing, just for whatever reason, kind of just justified doing a kind of long exposition narration there.
Yeah, with regard to the whole film, actually, the film as a whole, should I say? It feels like you've got so many different narrative threads that get sewn out, and all these things. How do you keep, on top of all that? Because rather than it becoming disjointed and difficult, because it didn't feel disjointed, but it was something that you had all these narrative threads that you had to sort of keep jumping from one to the other, and then eventually pull them all together in that ending. So how do you, as an editor, approach that? Yeah.
I mean, some people.
I'm giving good adverts here.
That is a common criticism, is that people feel there are too many stories, and it's hard to kind of, I guess, give them the proper payoff a lot of the time. Is, I guess, the problem that comes from that. But I'm glad to you it didn't feel disjointed.
Not to me,
No.
But I mean, that was definitely a main concern that Tim flagged very early on. He was like really concerned with the number of stories, and he was really concerned with how they were structured in the screenplay, because he just had an instinct that it would just be they would clash up against each other in an uncomfortable way. So, I mean, when you're editing, you're kind of editing just the scenes at a time, and so often I don't really get a sense of the narrative flow of the entire movie until shooting is over. I often, especially in the process I was talking about, you're really struggling to get the scenes done. So it wasn't until shooting was over, or when the strike happened, when shooting was shut down, that then I started kind of assembling the movie in order. And,
Mm-hmm.
the scene structure, I mean, we tightened a lot, especially in the first 15-20 minutes. We did tighten it a lot. But in terms
Yeah.
of the structure, that's how it is. Just the structure of the movie for the first 20 minutes. I mean, how it is in the final film is how it was written. Um,
Okay.
but then around that 20-minute mark, as I'm assembling, I'm like, oh, like you just, it started to go off the rails in that, like, it would be too random. Like you'd be with these characters and then you'd cut to a different scene with other characters and then you'd cut to a different scene with other characters. And it was like, it was random, you know.
Yeah.
There wasn't a kind of flow from scene to scene. Um, and so I mean, so part of that is then just figuring out, okay, well, how do we connect these scenes together?
Yeah.
Because it's like, every scene needed to somehow, because at least because there are so many different stories and they're not always connected. At least if you give the illusion
Yeah.
of them feeling connected, that will help.
Yeah.
So it was up. So from that point, I'd restructure the film based on just what I thought made sense to come next, and it wasn't always a literal thing, but I just wanted it to have that feeling that one scene was driving the next, one scene was
Okay.
leading into the next, as opposed to just, and meanwhile these characters are doing something, so that was about, structuring things so that, to me, there was some connection between the outgoing scene and the incoming scene. Or if there wasn't, it was about how can we adjust it so there is some connection.
Okay.
I mean, so like, one example is, like one restructure was from like Astrid and um, uh, Lydia in the graveyard talking about
Okay.
death and, after the funeral. And then just in the restructure, what happened is the next scene that came was Charles Dietz walking into the laundromat at the first time. So there is a kind of peripheral connection between these things. They're at the funeral of Charles Dietz, and then Charles Dietz is going to the laundromat. So that was one pitch I made. Like, we can like stick these scenes together if we have a transition shot. So, very late in the game, Tim shot a transition shot of Charles Dietz's gravestone that then kind of
Okay.
pushes in and down to the ground. So it has this transition moment from that scene into the next. So it goes from them talking about death and being at the funeral to Charles Dietz arriving in the afterlife. So to make a connection, just to make it
Yeah.
feel like we're progressing. Because otherwise, especially with the afterlife scenes, it would often feel like you were just meanwhile in the afterlife and you just cut there and things are happening.
Yeah.
It made it feel very banal. It also didn't make a distinction between the land of the living and the afterlife. It was like it had this feeling, oh, you can just cut anywhere. You can cut here, you can
Yeah.
cut there, but it lost its kind of specialness or weight or gravity. So that became just something we became really focused on, was like, you don't just cut to the afterlife, you transition. You have a reason to go there. Something in the previous scene is driving you to the afterlife.
Yeah, I
Yeah. I
love
see
those
you.
transitions. I think that really helped connect it, and even I think you used it further on too in the movie with Astrid's dad and that kind of stuff. So yeah, I think that made where it's like, we're going in, which is obviously it's been done before, but I think it's nice to have that where it's like, oh yeah, this is somewhere, not like an alternate universe. It's like right there
Yeah.
underneath us, kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So a lot of those things shot wise, yeah, those were all kind of conceived kind of very late in the process or after filming was done. And some of those transitions were picked up as kind of additional photography.
Oh, nice.
Um, so yeah, so that was kind of just the whole process of, you know, so yeah, it was kind of really just in my first assembly, I really even just starting restructuring the entire film.
Yeah.
And then I just showed it to Tim, and he was like thrilled. I mean, because it had really addressed a lot of his concerns. I mean, that obviously wasn't the final. We continued to kind of adjust and restructure, but it was, the kind of the first stab at like really taking a reorder of the film, and it was, much closer to feeling like a cohesive piece than he was thinking it would. So that was good.
One thing that I'm always intrigued with editors, especially on something that's a big sort of Warner Brothers or whatever, studio movie like this, is the input that other people have on that. Like when you also get notes and things like that, you're getting notes from producers, presumably, exec producers, possibly occasionally. How does that impact? Like if you think about how you used to edit in the past on things that were possibly not as big as this, is it a different kind of thing? Does it impact you differently? I don't know if
Well,
that's
I
a
mean,
really well asked question.
what's that?
I don't know if that's a really good question or not, like
No,
in
it
terms of
is.
the way I asked it, but yeah.
No, it is because, I mean, the real benefit of working with Tim is he is a Final Cut director. So,
Yeah.
I mean, that really just helps the process of the politics for sure. But he's also really interested in making the best film, and he invites people's input and he wants people's feedback. The problem is you don't always get very you don't always get the best feedback.
Yeah.
I mean, but he really wants like really good, thoughtful feedback on his films, like actual good criticism,
Yeah.
that he can, because it helps him see what are some of these areas we want to fix. So, definitely we got a lot of feedback from executive producers from the studio, and it did help shape the film for sure. But it's kind of like you have to kind of weed through a lot of times between like, out of what everyone is saying, you have to find kind of the kernel of what is their issue, and maybe you can address it another way, or, because often it's like the initial idea is not like the initial fix is not a great one. Like, for instance, like in that first scene when you go to Beetlejuice's lair, when you first see him in his lair with all the head shrinkers, the question is like, what is this place? Who are these people? What's going on here? And so, because it wasn't really clear, and so the initial idea is like, well, let's have someone explain it. I mean, that's generally the thing. Let's have someone say, like, whatever. My name is Beetlejuice, and I own this afterlife call center, and I have a number of employees, and we work hard to, make sure that we can sell bioexorcist packages. Obviously, I'm exaggerating. It's not that, but that's the general note. Is like, let's add dialogue to explain what's going on.
Gotcha.
And that's something that Tim is very allergic to. It's like he cannot stand dialogue of people explaining things. It's just so boring. And his thing is also like, oftentimes, especially when you're dealing with a movie like this, the more you explain something, often the less sense it makes. It's like you want more your audience to infer a lot of these details rather than to explain something and then them going, well, wait a minute, well, what about this or what about that? And then just you're off the rails at that point. So, that was the idea, is like, have Beetlejuice explain what he's doing there, explain what his job is, explain what his employees are doing. And Tim's like, this, you can't do this. This is crazy. This, you can't do this, But I'm like, oh, well, this is like an interesting, like, criticism. It's just the solution is wrong, So what I then did, to address it was, because they had all this footage of the shrinkers, and then I just had it so that when you cut to the shrinkers and they're on the phone, you hear the dialogue on the other end of the phone. So you hear their clients talking. So you get a sense of what they're actually doing. And then way, way late in the game, Tim also added that bit of this was like one of the last things we did, but he shot that bit of that skeleton switchboard operator, you know. So, but, you know, even without that, just being able to hear the conversations on the other end of the phone just explained what was going on there. And so you get the whole scenario and the vibe and what they're doing without needing to resort to expositional dialogue. It's more present tense in the moment thing going on. And
That's
then when
brilliant.
Tim saw that, he was like, this is great, you know, and he loved it, you know, I mean, so it's like, even though he had this initial reaction of, well, we can't explain this, we can't do it, we can't do that, that's crazy. When he saw that solution, he was like, oh, this is perfect because it's in the moment, it expands the world, you know, and so for him, he was like thrilled to make that change. So it's not always, you know, sometimes there's just like, you have to address the kernel of the node as opposed to actually what they're, you know, suggesting to do.
That's brilliant. I love that with the passive exposition, I suppose we'll call it. You know what I mean? Something, yeah, it really works. Well, Jay, we could probably go on all day, but we've done an hour here, so I probably need to cut this in a moment. But one of the questions that I wanted to kind of bring up is, what do you want to work on next? You've obviously worked on some fantastic projects so far. We know that you're going to go off and do some amazing stuff after this. I know that, but not because of this, but after this as well. So I was thinking, you know, what is it that you want to work on next? What is it that other styles or other projects, anything like that?
I really don't even think about it that much. I'm just, yeah, I mean, because I'm on Wednesday season 2 right now, and
yeah,
you know,
can't wait for that.
Yeah, so that's its own kind of beast. So, you know, I'm not thinking that much about the future, but you know, I definitely like to do another movie for sure. And you know, like I said before, I mean, my bucket list is doing some kind of, it doesn't have to be a musical, but you know, something that is very music driven for sure, that does have, you know, dancing or hopefully singing or you know, I mean, just because I mean, I just love working with music so much. It's such like a huge part of just the cinema experience for me, is like the style of the music and how it's used. I mean, it just kind of contributes to the whole aesthetic. So I'd love to do something that is just completely very music driven. Yeah, it doesn't have to be a musical, but something that has very, very music driven, which Beetlejuice is in a lot of ways. Maybe I'm just trying to turn everything I work into a musical.
But do you think that style's starting to come back? Because like Joker, is it Joker Folie à Deux is pretty much being billed as a musical. Do you think that style is starting to come back?
I don't know. I'd hope so. I mean, yeah, I mean, people still do. At large, I think people still don't really accept the musical as just like a form of entertainment. I think it's more just like a niche, you know, obviously the niche audience and is very passionate about it. But I think like on a mainstream way, I think it's still something that's very affronting to a lot of people. So, but, you know, I do think there's probably some creative way of doing a musical that's not like a traditional musical that's just very music focused and music driven in a way that, so people don't really almost kind of realize it's a musical in a way. You know, like
passive
Chicago,
musical, we could call it.
What's that?
Passive musical, we can call it, like passive exposition.
Well, yeah, because like Chicago or like Cabaret is an example of that, where it's like where it's people singing, but it's in the context of something where it makes sense that they're singing. So I think that's maybe the trick of how to do it. But I mean, I just love that kind of thing. So hopefully, maybe one day.
Yeah. And the final question I've got for you. Obviously, we've seen your Twitter, and it seems like you're a film geek a bit like us, which is great. And what have you been enjoying? Have you been able to get to the cinema with all your work that you've been doing and all the travel and everything? Or is there anything that you've seen recently that you've really enjoyed?
I go all the time. I mean, I did just see Megalopolis. That's just what I saw last night. I should have been packing because I'm going to Ireland today, but I should have been packing, but instead I went to Megalopolis. But I mean, I see like, I try to see, I prefer going to movies in the cinema, honestly. I don't even really like watching at home. You know, that seems to be the trend, but I don't like it because I'm not focused. I'm not as engaged or immersed by it. So I really just love, if for nothing else, just to be able to have that dedicated time of just like, this is what I'm doing now. And this is the only thing I'm doing. But, you know, I mean, so what did I don't know. I've seen lots of stuff. I mean, I just saw The Substance, which, I mean, from just like
Yeah,
editing point of view is like, was so exciting to see, just like a movie where they're just really focused on the editing and the style of the editing and using it to kind of push the format, the style of
yeah.
what people can see. I mean, like Everything Everywhere All at Once was like that as well, where it's just like, just like to see people really try to find new and exciting and fresh ways to use editing is like just so exciting to see. Oh gosh, what's my
I
favorite one?
believe he learnt to edit that as well. Didn't it? Didn't the guy who learnt to edit Everything Everywhere All at Once, wasn't he learning Premiere Pro whilst he was editing that film? I believe
Oh really? Oh, I'm not
about
sure.
that, which is
Oh,
kind of crazy, really, when you think about it.
but yeah, I mean, both those movies are so much about like using editing and sound for like a real,
Yeah.
like in concert to create like a real aesthetic experience for the audience, which is something that I'm, really interested in myself. So,
It's
but
quite
yeah,
a, it must, oh, sorry.
oh no, but I don't know. I go see lots. I see lots of horror movies. I saw Speak No Evil. I thought that was really good too. Such an audience pleaser as well. I mean, that's a great thing also when you can like see a movie with an audience and they're just so
Yeah.
engaged in it and so excited. So
It must be quite a daunting thing as well for editors. This final, I know we keep going final question. I apologize, but like, I suppose modern day audiences are a little bit more distracted because of smartphones and because of like I went to Megalopolis yesterday, and there was quite a few people who were sitting scrolling on the phones. I don't know. I'm not going to say
in the
them. That's
theater.
in
Oh,
the theater, and I'm the person who kind of does the coughing first and then tries to like, hey, like, and all this kind of thing from the back. But like, it's one of those where I imagine, as you're trying to keep that attention for the whole, like, whatever Beetlejuice was, 90-minute film or whatever it is. I imagine
yeah.
there's got to be something when you're sitting there going, do longer scenes, that don't have many cuts in it, work
Oh yeah.
with modern day audiences.
Oh, for sure. I mean, and that was part of, just, I talked about those abrupt transitions and stuff. I mean, part of that is literally just in a very basic way, like still to be like, pay attention, it's like to
Yeah.
keep
Yeah.
grabbing people's attention, and to like have a weird hairpin thing. Cause then people go like, oh, you know, also to
Yeah.
like wake people up. That's how I often think about it. Often cause I get really sleepy too. So it's like,
Yeah.
I like, I'm always just like, as an editor, it's like, wake up people. Like there's something interesting.
Like Beetlejuice is speaking Italian. What's going on?
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean that was something that was really interesting about the first preview of the movie is because you could really sense it a lot more because you
Yeah.
could sense where audiences dipped, which was mainly in the first half hour or so. I mean, in the first preview there was a real, which I didn't. It was so fascinating to see it because I didn't anticipate it, but you felt it in the theater.
Yeah.
And I just saw the movie in a whole new way after that because there was just this deflation, and it was like,
Mm.
oh no, you know. But like that really was so helpful in guiding. Then when I went back, because I just saw all the boring bits that I hadn't seen before,
Yeah.
So then when we did the second preview, I like, it was my mission to like cut out all those bits that I now saw as boring.
Yeah.
And then you just saw it in the second audience preview. Like it didn't have that same thing. It was just like a lot of very minor tweaks. It wasn't dramatic changes. It was very subtle tweaks within scenes. And I didn't even think it was that impactful. Like when we went back for the second screening, I was almost like, this is almost like a waste of time because we've hardly even changed anything. We've only started, is what I thought. But then we went back and we screened it again, and you could tell immediately the audience reaction and engagement was so much higher. And it was such a important lesson to be reaffirmed on, is that a lot of the times these really minor changes can really make a huge difference in how people see and interpret and enjoy a story. So that was definitely one of the big lessons for me, is that often it's not the big changes that can really affect an audience engagement. It's really sometimes just those little things.
That's amazing. Jay, it's been such a pleasure talking to you. It's such a pleasure having you on
Yeah,
our
thank you.
podcast. I'll wrap this up, but I'll say thanks so much, Jay. Thanks, Bob, as well, for learning the voice of Bob.
Yeah.
I'm going to take that with me for a while. But no, thank you so
Yeah.
much, Jace. And
Well,
good luck with everything you're going to do on Wednesday.
Yeah, thank you.
Can't wait to see it.
Awesome.
Awesome.
Thanks so
Later,
much, Jay. Thanks again for joining us. Yeah.